Hi, everybody. This is Joe Lample, the Joe behind Joe Gardner, and welcome to the Joe Gardner Show. This is episode number 440. Man, we're getting up there. And this one is thanks to Amy Prentice, the name you hear every single week as my colleague and basically producer of this podcast, along with our team, Christine and Brendan. But we were talking not too long ago about what we were going to do for upcoming episodes. And when we got to this week's podcast slot, she said, one that you haven't done in a long time is a book review on some of the books that you've read and you really liked, the ones that stood out. And maybe that would be a good one to talk about coming into the kind of the holiday season where we have a little more time to sit back and read. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. So I said, yeah, let's do that. So I went through, I have so many books. Just to set the background of kind of how this works for me, I get sent books all the time. People are pitching podcast topics. Many of them are authors. I love getting books, but we don't say yes to every one. It's the ones that seem to have promise that we say yes to. And then I look at all the books, and the ones that continue to show promise, I will read the book. So on average, I read about three, I'll call it work related, but they're pleasure books for me too. 3 books a month. And 2 to 3 or 2 of them generally will make it into a podcast episode. So all that to say, for any podcast that you listen to or watch that involves a author, I have read the book. No shortcuts there. I read the book. And I've accumulated a lot of books in the process, and some really stand out. So I started my list. Before I went back to the previous episode that I did, which was back in the, I can't remember number. It was like episode number 68, or maybe even not that new. So a long time ago, I think it was 7 years ago that I last did this episode, this kind of episode. And I made my list not referring back to that because, there are certain books that really stick with you. And for me, that's been the case. So I made my list for this episode again. And I think 7 of the 17 books on my list were ones that I had already talked about in the previous episodes. So for this episode, I decided to not reiterate those because you can go back and listen to that episode. We'll have a link in the podcast on listening to that. But that is a great foundation for books that have really been life-changing for me, real aha books, foundational books, really to who I am and, how I think about gardening and ecological responsibility, etc. So those are already there. So what you're going to hear today is the culling of that bigger list into, I think it's 17 new topics, new books, new titles, plus the 3 books that are next on my reading list on my nightstand that I will be getting to over the next few weeks. So with that, thanks to Amy Prentice, mainly, for inspiring this episode and for allowing me to share with you my new favorite books that I've read. And I guess there's been hundreds. I'm sure there's been hundreds since that last episode, but I've culled it down to the 17 I want to share with you today. Now, last thing before we get into this is not a complete list. It was really hard for me to cull it down to just, the 17 that I want to talk to you about today, because there are many books that I love and really appreciate the information in them. But I just can't do that many and fit them into one episode. So these are the ones I'm going with, and you'll see why when I get to each one. The first category, and I've divided this into, I think, 3 categories: pleasure reading, and then I've made some notes here for myself too: foundational and ecologically focused. That's another topic. And then another one is books that will wow you. Actually, there's 4 topics. And the other one is gardening resources with topic-specific information. So some educational ones, some kind of pleasure reading books, but really more geeky. So that's why I call them books that will wow you. Foundational and ecologically focused. Those are really good for everybody. And then we'll start off with pleasure reading, though, just for fun. We'll get this off started lightly. Margaret Rinkle, New York Times bestselling author, opinion columnist, also with the New York Times with a weekly column. She is a great writer and an incredible human being. I think she's one of us, because I think of us all that way too. But I just love the way she writes, and so do many others. And she came out with a book, not this year, maybe last year. It might be 1 year prior to that, called The Comfort of Crows. I know many of you have read it. It's a bestseller, and it's such a good book. And I did a podcast with her about this book, and many of the books I'll talk about today, I did podcast on, and I'll refer to those, and we'll have them all in the show notes. So if you want to go and dive deeper into the conversation around the book I'm going to talk about today, all of those that are podcast episodes, you'll know about those from the show notes, and I'll call them out as ones I did podcast on also. But this is one, we had a great podcast on it. But this book, The Comfort of Crows, is kind of like a weekly journal that Margaret did all through the year. And it's seasonal, but it goes week to week. And I love it because we can see ourselves in her shoes. Because I mentioned she's kind of like one of us. She cares about nature. She's observant. She's really got a keen eye for focusing on the little things that we often miss because we're not paying quite that close attention as Margaret is. But she finds a way every week in her small urban setting, her yard and her home, to find these incredible things and then write about them. And it's just such a joy to turn the pages on these short essays, totally consumable. You can read as many as you want at one sitting or one at a time. In my case, this is a book that sits on my nightstand also, and it's the last thing I read before I go to bed, and I'll read one or two essays, maybe three, and it's a great way to end the day because, although not everything she writes about is happy, there are observations about some things we wish didn't happen, but they're real. But overall, it just gives you a good sense that there are people that care like we do, and Margaret is a great ambassador for writing about those in the way that we can relate to and feel. So that's kind of the overview of it, but I made some notes because I want to make sure I capture the thoughts that I had when I was writing about what I wanted to tell you. So if I look down, I'm just checking my notes on the things that I didn't mention yet. Some examples of some of the things she writes about, and this is just a tip of the iceberg, but she notices the smallest things most of us might miss, like fledging birds learning to fly. She'll look out her window and she'll just take it all in, and she has this great way of writing about anything she observes. Wildflowers pushing through the soil, the rhythms of the season. She tends to write poetically. Suffice it to say, Margaret is basically writing about nature in a way that feels both intimate and universal, and you feel like you're reading a book that your friend wrote, basically. I love books like this where I can see myself in the author's shoes, and this is certainly one of those. And what really makes this book special and why I think it's so relevant is that she weaves together the personal and the ecological, and how deeply connected our lives are to the natural world right outside our door. So probably like me, many of you love to watch the birds feeding right outside our window. And as I mentioned, Margaret does a great job of writing about things like that. But it's those little moments that are great reminders of the things that really matter and the small things that we can appreciate through Margaret's writing. And that's not her only book, but that's the one that I wanted to feature on today, just because it had such an impact on me, and I think it will on you too. And I recommend everything I'm talking about today, but that's a good one to start with. The next pleasure reading book that I want to call out this time, and it's from Kate Bradbury. It's called One Garden Against the World. And this too is a recurring theme for me when I'm reading a pleasure book. I love to read gardening related pleasure books, but I really love the ones where I can see myself in their shoes, and it just draws me in. I just want to read more and more about it because I just feel connected to the author. And in this one, Kate just wrote such an inspiring and heartfelt book. She lives in the UK, and she lives on a small urban house, very small, she talks about that a lot in her book. It's so small, she only has 3 trees, a tiny little pond, kind of a postage stamp lot, but she has done everything she can to get the most out of it. But she just has created this sanctuary on a space that you wouldn't think there's enough room to do that, but she has. But she has such a caring heart for nature and wants to do everything that she can to support wildlife and pollinators and hedgehogs especially. She has a real heart for hedgehogs. And you are right there with her as she writes about all the effort that she's doing to rescue the caterpillars that are on the native flowers that are in the right of way that the landscape crew for the city is about to mow down in their maintenance. And she goes out there and talks them into just pausing long enough for her to go out and take a bunch of these plants that have the caterpillars on them so she can bring them home and then allow them to pupate and produce butterflies or moths or whatever it is anyway, just one example. And you're right there with the trials and tribulations of all of these kind of rescues. And again, with her hedgehogs, the efforts that she goes to, she becomes the resident hedgehog rescuer in the area. That's a big thing over there with the drought and the lack of habitat. Many of them are threatened, and they're just the really cute little critters. And there's a real effort now to try to do what they can to rescue as many as they can, but they're very much in peril. And Kate has taken upon herself to be that guardian in her area. And so she gets calls all the time about it. But overall, it's just a heartwarming book, and you can clearly see yourself in this book, I think. I certainly did. I just really appreciated her honesty and her realness that came through with every page turn. And I think the takeaway here, whether you have a small lot or a large lot or no lot at all, you can relate to this. But I think she really gives all of us hope that no matter the size of the land under our stewardship, we can make a difference. And she is proof of that over and over throughout her book. So it's inspiring, it's encouraging, and it's just pure pleasure to read that book. And so I hope that you will. The next one is from our friend, Dr. Doug Tallamy, probably best known for Nature's Best Hope. If you haven't read that one, start there. It's required reading, and many of us have read that book, but it's just such a foundationally important book for us to understand, how we as human beings can play a role in really helping give wildlife a chance based on all the many threats through pesticides and habitat decline and climate change. What can we do? And that book, I talked about it in the first episode like this. So again, the link will be in the show notes, but do make that high up on your list of reading if you haven't read it yet. And he's written several books since then, but his most recent book is the one I want to talk about today. And that is the title, How Can I Help? But what he had done was through all his years of writing and through his many appearances, through public speaking, and just there isn't a day that goes by that I don't hear his name. And so he's just everywhere in a good way. And he's a great ambassador for ecological gardening and environmental stewardship. And he is our blueprint for the things that we can do to be better stewards when it comes to gardening and ecological behaviors. But over all of this time, he's amassed thousands of questions. Many of those questions tend to be very similar in their nature. So he finally decided that he had saved all these questions, so he would categorize them and then consolidate them. And he ultimately came out with this most recent book, How Can I Help? And I remember him telling me in the last podcast episode I did with him before this book came out, and by the way, there's a podcast on this book. Every book he does, I talk to him about it. But the book prior to the one that I'm talking about now, I asked him, I said, so what's the next book about? Just not really knowing whether he was going to write a next book, but I guessed that he was. And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I think I'm going to do a book on really compiling all the questions I get and putting it into one reference book. So that's what he did. And that's what this book is all about. How Can I Help? And oh my gosh, it is fantastic. It's a page turner in a weird way, because you don't think about a book just that's a bunch of questions and his answers as a page turner, but he picked the best of the best as far as the questions. And of course, every answer that he provides is spot on. And every answer that you read is making you smarter as you read it. And so it's so good for that. And I can see this being a book, if you have it, that you would refer to frequently, as I do. And so I would just say that if you really want to kind of get your head around a source that you can thoroughly trust. If you don't know Doug Tallamy, he is a professor of entomology at the University of Delaware. He has been at this forever, and he is just widely respected around the world. Unfortunately, he's one of ours here in the U.S., and he's very generous with his information and time, and he is brilliant in these categories. This is a fantastic book, and you can scan the index of questions and find the ones that are relevant to you for the time and look them up and be prepared to be wowed. And I think you'll really enjoy this book. Okay, the next book is in the sort of the same category as foundational and ecologically focused. Sarah F. Jane is the author of a book called Nature's Action Guide, and she self-published it. And not that that's surprising, but it's so impressive that she took on a project like this. And by the way, this book is forwarded by Doug Tallamy. Ironically, she lives very close, like within a stone's throw away of Doug Tallamy. And so eventually they connected, and she pitched this book idea, and he said, I think you ought to write it. And then he did the forward to it. But this book, and I did a podcast on this one, Nature's Action Guide, Sarah does a phenomenal job of being that gardener that has thought about all the questions we have on things that we should be concerned about or things that we are concerned about, and steps that we can take at every level, whether we are a beginning gardener, an intermediate gardener, or an advanced gardener. She provides in every topic levels of participation that we can do that are all consumable, tangible, doable steps that all are significant in their action. And as I read through each one in this book, I continued to be more and more impressed, because this is a long-term gardener that had thoughtfully put this book together in a really impactful way. And I consider myself an advanced gardener, and yet with every section that I was reading through, I was reading new things that I could do that I wasn't doing or didn't know to do. And I told her, I said, I just think this is a must-have book. I was very impressed with it. And I just made a point of letting her know how much I thought that this book was such a great resource and something that didn't exist like this to this point. And I was very thankful that she put this out there and had the energy. I think she said it took her about 4 years to write this book, but it shows that a lot of thought and attention went into this. And then she provides great links to go deeper on every topic that she talks about. Not only does everything she writes about stand on its own, it's self-sufficient in what she wrote, but there's opportunities to go deeper on everything she wrote. But there's definitely links for more information that's really, really useful. So this is a book you cannot go wrong in having, and again, one that you would refer to often. And if you care about ecological gardening at any level, this book will fill your cup with information on what you can do, no matter where you are in your gardening experience, to be a better environmental steward as you garden. So I hope you will pick this book up and check it out. In the same category, again, about kind of stewardship and environmental care as gardeners, Basil Camus. If you listen to the podcast regularly, you know that I have interviewed him a couple times for his wonderful book, From Wasteland to Wonder, and his experience as a master certified arborist. He's out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and the irony of what he does now, which is giving freely of this information on how we can think about tree care rather than cutting them down. He and his father originally started a company where they were in the tree cutting business, basically. And years ago, Basil and his dad had a aha moment where they realized, I think we need to change our approach here and really help people understand the consequences of cutting down trees that may not need to be cut down, and instead advising them on how they could care for their trees. So they became a tree care company. And since then, Basil has really taken this on exponentially in his desire to help people do all they can to protect their trees, prolong their life, and not cut them down if it could be avoided. And then some. So anyway, this book, From Wasteland to Wonder, that Basil wrote a few years ago, is such a great resource. Yes, it's about tree care for sure, and it provides such good information on things that we can do, or information on when it's probably beyond what we should be doing ourselves and when we need to hire somebody. But it is rich in information. Again, I keep using the word stewardship, but that's the way he's writing these days, and that's what he's thinking about, and that's what his company is about. But what makes this book so powerful is the way it connects with restoration work, with everyday choices, and how we think about our urban or suburban landscapes and the wildness that still exists there, and what we should probably be doing to steward that. But here's what's really cool about Basil in this book. He gives it away. So if you want a hard copy of this book, and it is a beautiful, well-written, highly illustrated book, it's free with the cost of shipping. If you'll cover the cost of shipping, you can have a physical copy of this incredible book. If you want an online version of it, a PDF, it's free and instant. And we'll have information in there on how you can get either. But he's so generous in that way because he really cares, and he wants people to have this resource so that they can implement one or all of the, or many of the things that he talks about in this book. And lastly, he puts QR codes. This is a book where there are many QR codes throughout the book. So rather than making a book larger just because he'd write about it, what he did was he wrote about it, but he gave you a QR code so that if you care about that topic, rather than it taking up extra paper, you can, get to the QR code, and it'll open up an online resource that you can learn more about that particular topic, which I just love that about it. And there are really many good ones that you'll want to click on for the QR code too. So kudos to Basil for this incredible book. I'm changing categories on you now, and these are books that will wow you. And I have two since 7 years ago that I really want to call out. And I've done podcasts on both of these. And the first one I did several years ago. It's called Monarchs and Milkweed. Now, who doesn't love our monarchs? And we are well aware by now, or we should be, that they're highly threatened and their populations have taken a drastic decline. So from 20 years ago, we're down to about 8% of what we used to have 20 years ago. And that number is dwindling, sadly. So this book, Monarchs and Milkweed, and this book is written by Anurag Agiral. Such a fascinating book. This is kind of a geeky book, not in a hard to read way. It just goes into some of the science and a lot of the things that we don't inherently know when we are admiring these monarchs flittering around, and then what they do when they are, migrating from Mexico up to the Canada and back every year through 5 generations, I think. And then how they lay their eggs on milkweed, and only milkweed, because that is their sole food source for their caterpillars. But all that goes on between the dance, between the toxicity of the fluids in milkweed and the fact that the monarch caterpillars have to eat those leaves and take in that milky substance that is lethal to most wildlife that consumes it, the monarchs have been able to work around that. So it's very interesting to get more into the science of how that all plays out. But it's a fine balance, but a fascinating read. Ironically, this is a book that, and again, I say it's geeky, but it's not heavy, but it's really full of information. But it's kind of a page turner because it is one you don't want to stop reading because it's so interesting throughout the whole book from cover to cover. And I think the bottom line is that you'll have a whole new appreciation and a deeper knowledge of this interaction between the milkweed and the monarchs and the challenge that they have in making it through not only, a few weeks at a time, but throughout the entire year. And such an interesting book. I found it fascinating, and I think you will too. Speaking of fascinating, the book that came out, probably by now, it was last year, and I did a podcast on this one too, of course. This book is The Light Eaters, a New York Times bestseller, I believe, by Zoe Schlanger. And oh my gosh, she traveled the world in a quest to really understand the sophistication of how plants communicate and how they do what they do. Nobody, to my knowledge, has gone to the level that Zoe has to share with us some of the complexities and intricacies of plant life in the way that they communicate and how they can be deemed to have intelligence, maybe not in the human term, but clearly some of the things that they are doing scream intelligence to me. And there were many examples that will just have you shaking your head in not disbelief, but hard to believe, but true information on what we've learned about how these plants interact and function and survive and adapt and all of these things. And so I'll leave it there in hopes that you will be curious enough to read this book. But if you do, I think you'll consider this one a page turner too, and probably be shaking your head in awe many times as you go from page to page and chapter to chapter. And Zoe is also a great writer. And if you are into the Audible version of these books, Zoe read this book for the Audible version, and I read it and I listened. If I really like a book, oftentimes I'll listen to it and read it, and this is one of those. But I really enjoyed her narration of this book as well. So really a good one. Now I want to transition into gardening resources that are topic specific. Okay. And recently I did a webinar on seed saving, and here I am recording this in the fall. It happens to be middle of October, which is a classic time to be thinking about saving seeds from many of the native perennials and maybe some of your edibles from summer that are wrapping up before frost kills them back, and they've done their fruiting, and now it's time to harvest some of them for the seeds if you're a seed saver for the vegetables. But for me, I love saving all kinds of seeds, and especially now the native perennials as they've gone to flower, and now the seeds are coming forward, and I'm saving those. And for this webinar, I wanted to put that on in a way that was timely enough so you had time to respond to it. But as I was preparing for that, I pulled some of my resources that I have, books on seed saving that I find myself turning to all the time because it's so fascinating for me. I love seed starting, but to take it full circle, when you save the seeds that you in the fall that you then start in the wintertime, it's extra fun. But there's a lot of science to seed saving. Maybe more than you imagine. It's not as simple. I mean, it could be as simple as just tapping the seeds off and putting them in a bag or something and just sprinkling them onto the soil. I mean, gosh, in nature, a lot of the seedlings that germinate are from the seeds that fell in the fall, and they overwintered, subjected to some cold weather, which actually prevented them from germinating early, which is amazing. And so, yeah, I guess you could look at it as a very simple thing too, but when you understand the science behind how all of that happens, it's fascinating, and it's helpful for you to know how these seeds do what they do and what plants need another variety of the same species in order to make the seeds fertile versus ones that can't, even though they have the male and female parts in the same flower, they're incompatible and they can't fertilize themselves. That happens. And so when you get into seed saving, it's really fascinating to learn all of these things. And so there are 3 books that talk about this, as well as how to save seeds from all the different types of plants that you may want to save seed from, whether it's just vegetables or vegetables and perennials and grasses, and sky's the limit. But I have 3 books that really cover the gamut here. But what's interesting and not surprising with each of these books is that no matter how thick the book is, probably about at least a third to a half is dedicated to the science of seed saving first. Anyone that writes about this deems that to be essential. If you're going to be a good seed saver, you need to have a fundamental understanding of when and how to harvest these seeds and when they need, as I mentioned, another variety of the same species, or at least another genetically different plant of the same variety. So that's cool. But here are 3 books on that subject that I wanted to share with you. And the first one is called The Seed Garden, and it's by Seed Savers Exchange. Now, this is a gorgeous book, and Seed Savers Exchange, it makes sense that they would write such a book. And so back when Seed Savers Exchange was founded, Diane and Kent Whaley started a company because they wanted to provide a resource for protecting the genetic diversity of seeds that many were becoming extinct just because of the consolidation of the seed industry, and many of these had been passed down through generations, but it would hit a next generation who wasn't saving the seeds, and therefore seeds that were deemed very worthy of passing on to next generations, somehow they hit a speed bump and it was no longer happening. So through the brilliant idea of creating a resource for people to send in and preserve these seeds and protect the genetic diversity, so we would have a continuation and access to these critical seeds, that's how Seed Savers Exchange came about. It was only recently that they wrote this incredible book. And again, it dedicates a good portion of the beginning of it to the science of seed saving. And then they get into all the different types of ways to protect the species without it being, or the variety without it being cross-pollinated. So isolation tactics and just all the things you really should know as a successful seed saver. And I made a note here specifically just to call out the fact that it's not just a how-to manual, but it's also a deep dive into the art and science of preserving our food heritage. And that's really what Seed Savers is all about. They really focus on the edible seeds or the edible plants. And so that's where they really put their focus with this book. And I think the biggest call out here is just the fact that their mission behind this book was to protect the genetic diversity by keeping heirloom varieties alive for future generations. And that's really what it's all about. But the book, I can't say enough good things about it. And it's beautiful and incredibly informative as a resource that you will no doubt refer to often. Now, the classic seed saving book that came out in 2002 and was edited by the co-founder of Seed Savers Exchange, Kent Whaley, was called Seed to Seed, or is called Seed to Seed, written by Suzanne Ashworth. And this is a no-nonsense book. It is everything you need to know about vegetables, herbs, and some flowers is what this is. And it breaks down exactly how to grow them. So all the information that is relevant to that particular type of seed that you want to save, that information is there. So it's concise, but thorough, and the information doesn't change. Even though it was written almost 25 years ago, it's a go-to book for anybody that wants to have a great resource for seed saving. I call it an essential handbook for every serious gardener. So have it on your shelf ready to refer to. And then the third book is called The Complete Guide to Seed Saving. And this one is written by Robert Goff and Cheryl Moore Goff. And I would call this really a comprehensive guide to seed saving because it does cover a lot of different types of plants. If you really want to take control of your seed saving and feel like you understand the biology and the science and have a book that's comprehensive and yet approachable and equipping you with really, I can't think of anything they left out. And so how do you differentiate between any one of the three? If you're only going to get one, how do you make that decision? Well, I would say that you can't go wrong with any of them as your sole source for a great seed saving book. There are many others, but these are the three for me that are top of the heap for the books I would recommend. But I've also found that in each one, it has enough unique information that it's worthwhile, in my case, to have all three. So I guess the best way to make that determination for yourself is to look at the information we'll provide on how to learn more about each book online, and then you can make that assessment on which one not to get of the three. But again, my vote is for all three because they're all that good. Okay, so let's talk about another aspect of food gardening, and that is fruit tree pruning. Susan Poisner is someone I've interviewed several times, and I just find that she is such a good resource for fruit tree anything. Her niche is fruit tree expertise, and she's written several books on fruit tree care and pruning, and she has online courses, and she's a wealth of information, and she is a great, well-spoken communicator, and I've really enjoyed getting to know her. And the book that I'm recommending that you consider too, if you have fruit trees or want to have fruit trees, or the fruit trees that you have, you're just not quite sure how to prune them properly or when to prune them, this book is what you need. It's very consumable, well illustrated with simple diagrams that just cut out the fluff and don't add the extra stuff that just makes it clunky. And it's lean and mean and really a good resource. For me, I have fruit trees, but I love pruning. I think I'm good at it. But when it comes to fruit tree pruning, even though the science is really the same, I don't know why there's a kind of a wall for a lot of us that thinks maybe it's different and we don't want to mess up. But she equips us with the information that will help us get those trees turned around and shaped up properly and healthier, more productive. Having a book like that or having a resource like Susan around to refer to is very nice to put in your arsenal or in your library. So this book, Fruit Tree Pruning by Susan Poisner, we will, of course, link to it and have additional information. But I like it a lot, and I think if fruit tree pruning has been something you've been a little intimidated by, this will get you over that hump for sure. Now, a classic book on market farming and vegetable gardening organically is The New Organic Grower by Elliot Coleman. Now, you probably know that name if you've been growing food for any length of time. Elliot Coleman is what I would call a rock star market farmer, gardener extraordinaire. He is internationally known and respected. He's been around for a very long time. He lives in Maine, and Barbara Damarosh is also his wife, and she is a well-known author and an expert gardener as well. Elliot loves his work, and I know that for sure, even if I hadn't had the opportunity and privilege to go spend time with him over several days filming an episode for Growing a Greener World on his farm, hanging out with him, sitting in his greenhouse as he was soil blocking up thousands of tomato seedlings into 3/4 inch cubes that he would bump up to 2-inch cubes and then larger ones. He really, as long as he's been doing it, he's someone, I think, that similar to myself, loves what he does so much, it doesn't ever seem like work. And yet he tirelessly does what he does, writes about it, speaks around the world. And as I mentioned, he's just highly regarded for his knowledge and his generosity in sharing that information. As I mentioned, Elliot is an organic gardener. He's all about soil health, crop rotation, season extension, all the nuts and bolts of everything you would need to know. The information is timeless. He has been doing this for years. He continues to perfect his craft, and he has developed systems and techniques that have been emulated around the world. So he is the innovator of so many things that we do today that he discovered over his time, over decades of doing what he does. So whether you're managing a small market farm or a personal home vegetable garden, anything that Elliot Coleman writes is going to be gold. But this book, The New Market Farmer, which was revised in the past few years, it was updated from, I think, maybe several editions over the past few decades. This one is all updated and it's really good. And every now and then I'll pick it up and just start reading it because it's just good, solid information, and it's worth rereading many times. But it's a deep, rich resource about everything we need to know to be better organic gardeners. Here's a book that I want to share with you. You may have it already. You may have heard the podcast I did with Meg Cowden on her book called Plant, Grow, Harvest, Repeat. I did a podcast on this book too. I've interviewed Meg on a television show I did for Growing a Greener World from her garden. She's has a great website. She posts a lot from her garden. She is geeky in the most loving way possible. I love her curiosity to go deep on topics and her spreadsheetiness with analyzing data and keeping track of everything. She is a gift to gardeners in her knowledge and her willingness to write about it. And when she wrote this first book, Plant, Grow, Harvest, Repeat, it was a book really on succession planting. And what's so important about that is that there are very few books that I'm aware of that have really taken a dive into writing an entire book on succession planting. And many of us want to extend the season. We want to start as early as possible, and we want to get as much mileage out of whatever we're growing as possible by extending the season on the far end too. And I don't know anybody that does it better than Meg. And thankfully, she decided that was the book she was going to write about. And the neat thing about Meg is that she lives in a very cold part of the country. She lives in northern Minnesota. And so it's amazing how much production she can get out of a very short growing season. But she uses low tunnels, and she uses lots of techniques that allow her to get a lot of bang for her buck. And she writes about it and shares all of her wisdom in this book. It's about observation, flexibility, building a garden system and keeping everything alive, and then harvesting and making the most of saving the harvest and how she does that. She cans and preserves. I don't know how she does it all, but she does it with passion, and she walks her talk, and she is a great inspiration and a great role model. And it's one heck of a book. If succession planting is something that you are a little tripped up about, or you just would like to improve your skills in that department, it's your book. It's the go-to book. I can't say enough good things about it, but I'll stop right there. And I'll move on to the next one. And this is going to be a little bit of a shameless plug. It's on my book, the Vegetable Gardening Book. Just in full disclosure, before I wrote this book, my favorite go-to vegetable gardening book, I listed in the first version of this series. So that first podcast episode on book recommendations, Edward Smith wrote a book called The Vegetable Gardening Bible, and it's excellent. It really is good. It was written in 2000, and all the information is still timely, and it's a great resource. I have it. I love it. And couple years ago, when I wrote the vegetable gardening book, I was asked to do that. I had said prior to the many pitches that Jessica Walliser, who I'll mention out loud because she's got a great book I'm going to mention in a minute, but she works with Cool Springs Press, and they are the publisher of my previous two books. But she had been pitching me book titles that she wanted to see if I would consider writing for a long time. And my work life is so busy, and I'd already written two books, and I thought I would stop there, and I'd said I'd stop there, and I said no many times to the many pitches that came in. Not that they weren't bad titles. I thought they were all good, but I didn't think I'd ever write another book. So I was already predisposed to say no to anything that she pitched. And even when she pitched the vegetable gardening book to me, before she told me the title of the topic that she wanted me to write about, she said, I think this is the book for you, and you're the only one that we want to write this book. So I had, of course, the natural question was, well, what is it? And it was the vegetable gardening book. And when she said it, I instantly knew, although I didn't show my cards at the time, I instantly knew that that was a book I would say yes to, and I did, obviously. And I'm glad I did, because I've been growing food for my family, for me, as my passion, and as my profession for almost 3 decades, or maybe 3 decades or more. And my real pivot point when I went from passionate, avid gardener for my avocation, for my hobby, although I also had a consulting business in horticulture, so I was doing it as part of my living already. My real turning point professionally, which led to everything else, was in 2003 when I was asked to host a new show on DIY Network called Fresh from the Garden. And I was picked to be the host in a national search. You've probably heard the story before, but just briefly, the whole series was about teaching people how to grow food from seed to harvest, one crop at a time. Every episode featured one particular crop. So tomatoes, peppers, watermelon, eggplant, squash, etc. over 52 crops, 52 episodes, 3 years in the making, and retired because we ran out of things to teach people how to grow. But through that process, we had no failures, and thank God for that, because my producer, before I started the first episode, she sat down with me and she looked me square in the eye and said, I just want you to know, failure's not an option for anything that we were filming on how to grow. And I'm like, no pressure there. But anyway, over 3 years, we really didn't have any failures. Much of that had to do with the fact that I'd been gardening for all of my life, pretty much. And I was always curious about the best practices and the science behind everything, the why-do behind the how-to, all the things I talk about and teach you about. Well, I've been practicing those things for a long time before I was ever asked to host that show, but I implemented all that I knew and the science behind everything, and I made everything work. And since then, I've never slowed down, and in fact, it's only gotten busier in regards to food growing and everything about organic gardening. So when it came time to maybe write this book, yeah, I said I'd do that. In this book, I've incorporated much of that information because if I was going to write this book, I wanted you to have a resource that could walk you through everything about everything that's important to have a successful vegetable garden. And that was the book that I ended up writing. And so if you're curious about a vegetable gardening book that I think will serve you very well, and it will include about 30 of the top crops, both warm and cool season crops that you can grow, and how to do it from seed to harvest. That information is in there for all of those, plus all the chapters that help you take your vegetable gardening from start to finish, from site selection to options for the beds that you build, if you build a bed at all, versus in-ground, fertilization, all of those things I already mentioned. So enough about my pitch on the vegetable gardening book. Check it out if you want. We'll have the information in the show notes as well. I have 3 more books on my list that I want to recommend to you. And 2 of them are by a friend of mine, Suzanne Mulvihill, who is a wonderful gardener, a great human being. She and her husband, Bill, both are fabulous gardeners. But Susan is a really good writer and a excellent vegetable gardener. She has written 2 books that are on my close by bookshelf on quick references. One is the Vegetable Garden Problem Solver Handbook, and the other one is the Vegetable Garden Pest Handbook. And suffice it to say, Susan has been gardening a very long time. She's an organic gardener. She lives in Spokane, Washington, and she has a great raised bed garden there. But she's a wonderful communicator, but she's a really good gardener. And so she, I know, is an excellent researcher also, because she is somebody that I have fact-checked things that I write, ebooks or books or articles or posts or courses. She's my go-to person, one of my go-to people that I trust implicitly for objective advice and corrections. But when she writes something, I know it's going to be accurate. I know it's going to be good. I know it's going to be well written, resourced, and it's going to be reliable. And so I lump these 2 books together. Although they're separate, there should be companions that you have both books. But if you are looking for something that's just really easy to navigate and cuts right to the chase and helps you basically key out a answer to a challenge that you have related to pest or diseases, these 2 books would be my recommendation for great resources that you should put into your library. It's like having an experienced gardening friend right there saying, here's what's going on and here's how to fix it. I made a note to say that because that's how I feel about it. But the advice always goes back to organic, environmentally responsible solutions, and I respect that. And that is really what I'm looking for when I need help with solutions to problems. And Susan's books are my go-to source for that. And then the last one of the books that I've read and want to recommend to you is Attracting Beneficial Bugs to Your Garden by Jessica Walliser. I mentioned her name a minute ago. Not only is she great at pitching book ideas, she's also a great author, and she's a knowledgeable gardener. She's a horticulturalist, and she is an entomologist at heart. So her real passion is insects. And companion planting is a topic that you've probably heard, and many of us try to follow that. But the books to date, quite frankly, are more anecdotal than they are science-based. That is until Jessica wrote a book called Attracting Beneficial Bugs to Your Garden. And I think it really is maybe the only one that takes that subject of companion planting, which is basically plant choices that you can put in your garden that serves a purpose. Oftentimes it's help with reducing pest pressure, but it may also include plants that you can put next to other plants that produce something through their roots that provides, certain compounds or enzymes or nutrients that could benefit the plant next to it. But whatever it is, and usually it ties back to, what can I do to disguise, confuse, or repel pest insects from coming in and harming my cash crops, for lack of a better term. Those are the plants we're trying to save or protect. And what can we plant next to it that, may sacrifice, maybe the sacrificial plant, or even better, just one that maybe draws the pest insects away from the ones we're trying to protect. That's generally what we think of when we talk about companion planting. But anyway, to Jessica's credit, she took the science approach to combinations that have been tested and proven or show reliable promise in working as ways to provide a companion planting concept in concert to achieve the outcome that we're trying to do with certain plants in our garden. But that's the one that I refer to if I'm looking for something that may fall into the category of companion planting. That's the book that I trust and rely on for sound information. All right, I'm going to wrap it up, but here's how I'm going to do it. I have 3 books that are currently on my nightstand. I've referenced that a few times, but the reason why I say that is because of the ones that are going to be read next are the ones that go on my nightstand. And that doesn't mean I only read them at night. That just means that's where I know to go find them because those are the ones I know I'm going to be reading next. With that, let me set them up. And the first one is called The Overstory by Richard Powers. And credit goes to Amy Prentice on this one too. This is a book she read last year and loved it and recommended it to me then. And I immediately bought it with the intention of reading it, but got sidetracked and never got a chance to do it. But I'm about to read it. It's the next one on my stack, so it's coming up here in the next week. So let me tell you about it. And here's one where I've made a note that I want to really read to you because I haven't read the book. I can't speak from personal experience about my takeaways. This book weaves together the lives of several characters, each with their own connection to trees. The book is apparently both heartbreaking and deeply hopeful, but the trees give a voice and presence that feels almost spiritual, reminding us that forests aren't just backdrops to our lives, they're living communities that we're a part of. And after reading it, we will never look at a tree or a forest the same way again. It's a beautiful, moving reminder of why protecting the natural world isn't just good stewardship, it's a moral calling. And I think this book is going to be an extremely timely topic. This is me talking now, to include in our short-term reading list. And that's why it's next on my list. This next one, the title's a little grim, but it is a sad story, but it's a true story and it's an important one. And it's called The Murder of Nikolai Vavilov by Peter Pringle. And you may know this story, but it is one of the most compelling and heartbreaking true stories in all of agricultural history. And it tells the story of Nikolai. He was a brilliant Russian botanist, and his life mission was to preserve the world's crop diversity. And long before most people even understood what that meant or why it was important, but he traveled the globe for modern plant breeding and food security. But it was under Stalin's reign that his dedication to science and his genetic diversity clashed with political ideology. So Vavilov was arrested, he was imprisoned, and in a tragic twist of irony, and this is the crazy part, he died of starvation while trying to protect the seeds that could have saved his life and fed millions. But for anyone who cares about plant science and the future of our food, this story will stay with you long after you finish the last page. It's already stayed with me. I haven't even started reading it yet, but just from knowing that this really happened and the irony of how he died in the process of trying to save food for millions of people is just incredibly sad. And, I can't really say I'm looking forward to reading this book, but I feel like it's an important book to read as a mark in history that we should not forget. The last one, on a brighter note, is one similar to Monarchs and Milkweeds. It's called The Milkweed Lands. It's written by Eric Lee Mader. I had the privilege of meeting him in person and doing a television episode with him for Growing a Greener World. He is with the Xerces Society. He's a biologist. He's super smart. He's really articulate. He's has his own nursery and prairie garden, but he's fascinating. And I loved meeting him and getting to know them. But he wrote this book. It's part storytelling and part celebration of the wild landscape. This is one that celebrates and supports milkweed and all the creatures that depend on it, especially monarchs. And Eric brings the perspective of an ecologist and conservationist. He is both, but he writes with kind of a poet's touch, connecting the dots between the soil, the pollinators, the prairies, and people. And what makes this book stand out is how it ties the small and the grand together, showing that when we restore a patch of milkweed with native habitat, we're participating in something much bigger. So if you care about pollinators and wild places and the web of life that connects them all, the Milkweed Lands will be an inspiring read for you, I have no doubt, because I know Eric and I read his writing before. It's going to be a good one, and I can't wait to get to this one. Well, that's going to do it. And I hope amongst those 17 plus books that I talked about, you found one or two, or maybe even more, that resonated with you and you might want to check out, or maybe you've already read some of those and you are a fan as well. I hope so. And let me know also in the comments here if there's a book that I didn't mention that you feel is worthy of making the list. I'd be very interested and learning about those so that I can include them for consideration. I love to read, and anything related to gardening that you recommended is something I will be sure to check out. And then let me know, and I'll give you some feedback when I get a chance to read it too. So that's it. And as always, as we wrap up, thank you to Amy Prentice, again, especially now for the recommendations for this podcast episode and the book recommendations for the Overstory and more. And thank you, Brendan O'Reilly and Christine LaFond, the remaining members of the A-Team, super important people to make these things happen every week. And I will be back here again, as always, now that this is a regular thing as of about 3 months ago, with our next episode that will appear here live on our YouTube channel, Joe Gardener TV. And if you're not already subscribed, I hope you will consider doing that, because we would appreciate it. And then we will also be letting you know through a notification that there's a new episode for you to check out. So in addition to these weekly podcasts that will be now appearing into the feed, I'm going to be doing a lot more DIY and how-to videos that will appear on the same channel, including the big makeover coming up for the raised bed vegetable garden. And prior to that, probably a redo on the compost bins and the completion of the nursery area that I've already started and posted part 1 and part 2 on in the YouTube channel already. So you can get a head start on where we're at with that, and what's to come is a video I will be doing in the next few weeks as I finish up on that project. So anyway, all of that to say, I'll see you again next week. And as always, thank you for watching. If you're brand new, I really appreciate you being here. And if you've started watching these on YouTube since we started doing them here, you're an early adopter. And I'm really thankful that you are consuming the content here in the visual format. And hopefully this will catch on. And as you know, my objective for every single episode is to help you take the guesswork out of gardening by teaching you the why-do behind the how-to, so that you can become a better, smarter, more confident, and educated gardener through various ways, including some awesome books. And I'll see you here next Thursday for the next episode of the Joe Gardener Show. And I look forward to having you right back here to join me for that. And until then, take care and have a great week. And I'll see you back here soon. Take care.